Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Today we're going to be talking about medicinal herbs, and I want to share with you the medicinal herbs that I'm planning on growing in my garden this year. So we're actually starting outside today by my garden because the first category of medicinal herbs that I want to share with you are perennial herbs. Today in this video I'm going to break it down into categories. So I have some perennial herbs that while I'll be growing them this year, I won't have to plant them or start seeds or anything like that because I already have them growing and they come back year after year. So I thought that first it would be nice to walk through the garden. I'll show you what I already have planted and growing. Then we will talk a little bit about wildcrafting, which is the second. I don't really want to say it's a category of medicinal herbs that I'm growing, but it's a category of medicinal herbs that I have access to and will be harvesting. But that is a great category of herbs because they're grown completely by nature with no input from me. You just have to recognize them and harvest them. Finally, we'll be heading into my house and I'm going to show you the seeds for the herbs that I'm going to be starting this year brand new. So we'll start here outside the garden fence. And you may recognize some of these herbs. We've actually had a lot of wind the past few days that blew all these leaves back in place. Now, I know I said we're going to be talking about medicinal herbs, but you may recognize some of these same herbs as culinary herbs. This is my oregano, just starting to come back. And then over here, this is my lemon thyme. A lot of herbs that we're familiar with as culinary herbs actually have a lot of medicinal benefits too. And if you're new to medicinal herbs, those are a great place to start because they're familiar. They're something that you can easily access. You know, they're really available. And for the most part, they tend to be really safe as long as they're used properly. You know, we use them in cooking. And so for most people in most situations, they tend to be fairly safe. That being said, I'm not a doctor. I don't have any medical training. So I definitely want to encourage you to do all of your own research when it comes to using herbs medicinally. Because while, as I mentioned, these specific herbs, these culinary herbs here are safe for most people in most situations, they aren't safe for everybody in every situation when they're used in a medicinal dose. A lot of times a medicinal dose will be a little bit different than a culinary dose. So you definitely want to make sure that you do your research, make sure that you are comfortable with using that herb for your body. And you also want to, one thing you want to look into when you are studying medicinal herbs is any interactions or potential interactions with any medications that you're taking. So that's my little disclaimer. I'm going to share with you the herbs that I'm growing, but definitely make sure to do your own research before deciding to use any of these herbs for yourself or for your family. So thyme in general tends to be really good support for the respiratory system in addition to just making our food taste delicious. So this is a great, easy one to grow. And we're going to go around the corner here. And you may recognize this as catnip. And this is another great one that is so easy to grow. So most people, when you think of catnip, you know, you not surprisingly think of cats. You know, cats love catnip. I know my cats can't get enough of it. And it makes them a little bit wild and crazy. But it's interesting that it actually tends to have a very different effect when it comes to people. Catnip for people, for the most part, tends to be very calming, very soothing. Can also be really good for supporting your digestion and also supporting your body through a fever. So catnip is a great one to grow, very easy. It's a perennial that comes back year after year. And as you can see, it tends to spread. I started with one little plant and now I've got this nice big patch here. Catnip is in the mint family, so anyone who's familiar with mint would not be surprised by the fact that it really likes to spread. While I'm out here, I'm going to pick a little sprig of this to bring inside to my cat Belle. She's an indoor cat, at least as of right now, so she appreciates when I bring her in a little treat. She doesn't have access to the catnip patch out here. So buried in these leaves here you can see my peppermint is just starting to come back, and got some wild violets in there too. But there's little bits of peppermint. I've got a pretty good sized peppermint patch here. So peppermint is a really familiar medicinal herb. It's a great one to start with. One caution I do want to mention if you're growing your own peppermint is that you want to contain it somehow. Anything in the mint family tends to be a pretty aggressive spreader. You may have noticed that mine is not really contained, which was not necessarily the wisest decision on my part. I have been able to manage it pretty well to this point, but if you want to make a little less work for yourself, life a little bit easier, I would recommend growing your mint in a pot. Now, peppermint is great because, for one thing, it's delicious. So one of my favorite benefits of peppermint is that you can mix it with other herbs that don't taste as good. You can put them in a tea together. The peppermint will kind of mask the flavor and make it something delicious that you actually want to take. Peppermint is also a great support for fevers. It's also a great support for digestion. It's just peppermint's also an interesting herb because we think of it as a cooling herb. It can be cooling or heating depending on how you use it. So I find that it's a really great herb. Now, I know I mentioned we're going to talk about wildcrafting or foraging herbs in a little bit, but right near the peppermint patch, I noticed this little bit of mullein that sprouted up here. So we'll go a little bit out of order, and I'll just mention mullein. Mullein has a couple uses that I really like. Now, mullein is probably a fairly familiar plant to a lot of you because depending on the area that you grow in, it's very common. Actually the common name of this plant is common mullein. So it's a plant that is really widespread. It is a biennial, which means that in its first year, it's just going to have this little rosette of leaves that it has here. It'll get larger than this, but the first year, that's all it's going to produce is that clump of fuzzy leaves. The second year, it'll live through the winter, and then it will send up a really tall stalk in the center of the plant, and it will have a spike covered with little yellow flowers. I'm sure that is a plant that would be really familiar to many of you. Those little yellow flowers are actually really commonly used to help support your body when you have earaches or ear infections. A lot of people will take those flowers, just wilt them a little bit, and then infuse them in some olive oil. It also helps if you infuse the mullein flower olive oil with a little bit of garlic, and then put a little drop in your ear. Now, just as a little caveat there, you do want to make sure that you don't use it in a type of situation where the eardrum is perforated or something like that, because getting that oil actually into your ear canal can be negative. You don't want to do that. But it is something that I actually don't really have experience using it that way because thankfully nobody in my family is really prone to ear infections. So I don't have any actual experience with that, but it is a very common use for that plant. Another common use for the leaves themselves is for respiratory issues. If you have a really deep chest cough, it is supposed to be really helpful and beneficial for that. Now, this is just supposed to be a really quick overview video, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. So you can definitely research the ways that you can use that mullein to help loosen up a deep chest cough. I do just want to mention that if you make a tea out of it, many people find the little hairs on the leaves irritating. So once you've brewed your tea, you do want to strain it through a coffee filter just to remove those hairs. So again, something to look into, especially if you have mullein growing in your area. Since I already blurred the lines a little bit between my perennial herbs and some wildcrafting or foraged herbs, I want to mention dandelion here as well. Dandelion is another wild plant that most of us are probably really familiar with. So dandelion is a really common plant in most areas. It's often considered a weed. I mean, as we know, the word weed is very subjective. There isn't any kind of botanical definition of a weed. A weed just means a plant growing in a place where you don't want it. So technically, any plant can be a weed if it's growing somewhere you don't want it. I personally love dandelion, and I don't consider it a weed because, for one, it's really beautiful just to see those happy yellow flowers, one of the first signs of spring. I really enjoy it. And it also has so many uses as well. Dandelion is edible. So a lot of people, you can take the leaves and you can wilt them like you would many other greens. The flowers can be made into jelly, can be made into fritters. There's so many uses for it. Dandelion is also a really good support for your digestive system. Specifically, depending on whether you focus on the leaves or the root, it can be a support just for your urinary system or for your digestive system. So that's another one to look into, especially if you have access to dandelion growing wild, which I know probably most of you do. One other thing to consider whenever you are wildcrafting a plant, that basically means harvesting a plant wild that you didn't grow, that wasn't grown by anyone, you're just finding it grown locally, is you want to make sure that you know the area that you're harvesting it from. So personally, I prefer to avoid any area that may have been sprayed with any kind of toxic chemical or if it had been growing on the roadside and potentially has exhaust from cars or anything like that. So I harvest from open fields, places, you know, preferably on my own property, where I know that I don't spray anything that I wouldn't want to consume in my body. That's something to just be mindful of as you are harvesting wild herbs. So I'm looking here along the edge of my beds for some plantain, which I know I have growing here, but I don't think it's come up yet. It's a little bit early in the season for plantain. So I think I have shared a little bit of my experience with plantain before on this channel. Plantain is actually my first real experience with natural herbal medicine. One time my son was stung by a yellow jacket when he was really little, and we were out at a new house that my friends were in the process of buying or had just purchased. They hadn't moved in yet, so the house was vacant. We didn't have any first aid supplies or anything. You know, my son was, I think he was like 2 or 3. He was really little, and he was obviously very upset having been stung by a yellow jacket. And I remembered something I had read online about how plantain leaves are supposed to be very good at drawing out things like that, like the venom from the bee sting, or in this case, the yellow jacket sting. So I went out into the yard. I assumed that there was some growing there because it's like dandelion, it grows pretty much anywhere. So I found a couple leaves. I basically chewed them up to make a paste and stuck it on the sting. And I could not believe it. It was one of those things where, you know, I had heard it talked about before, and I was like, it's probably, you know, herbal medicine. You know, it's like not as good as real medicine. But I could not believe the relief was pretty much instant. And since then, I have been really looking into what other natural remedies might be as effective, or in some cases even more effective than what we think of as real medicine. So that is a great use for plantain. It's also really good for just skin irritations in general, for rashes, soothing your skin. So that's a great one. Definitely familiarize yourself with that plant if you have it growing in your area, which I would say there's probably a pretty good chance that you do. Okay, so we're heading on over to my garden expansion now. I know I said I was going to share with you all of my perennial herbs that I already have growing, and then we were going to talk about wild crafting herbs. We kind of got the order a little mixed up. I think I've shared with you at this point everything that I wanted to about the wild crafting herbs, the really common herbs that grow in my area. So now we're over here at my garden expansion, and I have a few other herbs that I want to show you guys. So here's a little bit more thyme. The thyme I showed you before is lemon thyme. This is just a classic thyme. And here I have lavender. This is another one that's probably very familiar to a lot of you. So lavender is probably most well known for its relaxation properties. It does have a very intense kind of herbaceous florally flavor, but you can harvest the lavender buds. You can mix them in a tea for relaxation. You can sew them into like a little sachet and sleep with them near your pillow. You could use it just to scent your sock drawer, something like that. Lavender does have a lot of uses. As I said, relaxation is probably the most familiar use, but there are a lot of other uses for lavender too, so that's definitely another one to look into. And as you can see, my lavender, I just planted this last year, is coming up really nicely. So I'm anticipating actually getting to harvest some this year. So over along this fence here, I have some perennial lemon balm, which we're going to dig under these leaves and see if it's, yes, it looks like it is coming up. So down in here, you can see these little bits of lemon balm leaves coming up here. And this is another one of my favorite perennial herbs. So lemon balm is also in the mint family. It's another spreader, so it's another one that you want to be very mindful of where you plant it. Lemon balm is a great perennial herb. It's really easy to grow. It's really delicious, sort of like peppermint. I would say, in my personal opinion, the flavor is not as strong as peppermint, but it does still have a really agreeable flavor. So that's another one that you can mix into a tea with other herbs to give your overall blend a really good flavor. Now, lemon balm is really good just for soothing your mind, just for calming. It's really good for a lot of similar things as some of the other mints we've talked about. It can be a really good support for fevers. It does have some antiviral properties, so it can be soothing for certain viral infections. It can really help your body, again, with digestion. A lot of people say that it's very good for promoting a positive mood as well. just for helping deal with a little bit of mild sadness, blues, things like that. So again, that's another one that I definitely recommend researching and looking into. So we are going to head into my house now, and we're going to look at some seeds. I'm going to show you some seeds for some herbs that I'm planning to start this year, either for the first time or something that is, in some cases, annual herbs that need to be started every year. Now, that is not the exhaustive list of herbs that I plan to harvest from my yard, but it's just what we're going to talk about today. I'm sure as the season goes on, I will share more herbs with you, so definitely stay tuned. For now, let's head into the house and go look at some seeds. So now let's talk about some seeds for some medicinal herbs that I'm starting this year. You can see I've got lots of seedlings growing behind me. These are my vegetables. These are not actually medicinal herbs. I think really soon I'm going to do, as you can see, a lot of them are growing pretty large right now. So I think pretty soon I'm going to do like a little seedling tour, like an indoor garden tour, and we'll talk about how all the seedlings are doing. But for today, I'm going to talk about medicinal herbs that I'm starting from seed this year. So the first is calendula. This variety is Resina calendula, and I like this specific variety because the medicinal aspect of calendula is in the resins, and this variety is supposed to be higher in those medicinal resins than other calendula varieties. So this is the one that I like to grow. Now, I did just film a video talking about the flowers I'm growing in my vegetable garden. I think I also included that in that video. This one is kind of falls into multiple categories, but I'm going to mention it again today. I really like calendula for the garden. This is an annual, which means that it only lives for one season. So that's why I need to start new seeds for it again this year, even though I had a lot of it growing last year. Calendula, you harvest the flowers. And calendula is probably most famous for use in skincare. Those resins are just really good for your skin. They just help maintain healthy skin. They're also really good at soothing irritations in your skin. They're really good at soothing rashes, for helping wounds to heal more quickly. This is just a really great all-around medicinal plant to grow. It's very easy to use. One of the lesser known benefits of calendula, which I really actually appreciate, is it works really well as a support for your lymphatic system. You know, a lot of times when you first get sick or you're first getting sick, you get those swollen glands in your neck and you just feel overall kind of crummy. That's your body trying to flush out toxins or viruses or just whatever's in your body that it doesn't want there. It's trying to flush it out. Calendula is really good at helping your body be more efficient at just flushing that stuff through your lymph system. So it's a really good support for that. So those are the two primary ways that I use calendula, but I do really appreciate it for those benefits. So I am starting some of this again this year. Now, lemon balm, I know we did already talk about this. We looked at my lemon balm outside. I do actually want a couple more plants of lemon balm. So I'm experimenting with winter sowing some of this lemon balm out on my deck. So far, I have to check on it again. The last time I checked, I didn't have any germination yet. You know, I'm fairly new to winter sowing, so I'm kind of getting the feel for what works well sown that way and what doesn't, but I am trying to grow a little bit more of this year. Next, I want to mention common yarrow. Now, you'll notice that this is different. Yarrow is often grown as an ornamental garden plant as well. It comes in many colors. It's really beautiful. This is just the common variety. While I think some of those kind of fancy, more ornamental varieties probably do have some medicinal benefit as well, this one is supposed to be the original medicinal plant. And so if you're growing it for medicine, this is what I would recommend growing. Now, this does grow wild in my area, so I could have also included that in the wild crafting section. But I find that in my yard anyway, I can't always reliably find a good source of this, so I wanted to start some of my own. This I am winter sowing as well, and I will say that this has germinated and actually looks amazing. So this, at least in my area, is a great candidate for winter sowing, probably because it does grow wild in my area anyway. Now, this is a really great plant for things involving wound care, it's good at helping your body to form clots more quickly and to kind of slow down excessive bleeding. Now, obviously, if it's a really severe wound, you definitely want to seek medical attention. This is also really good for fevers. One of the classic combinations for supporting your body through a fever is peppermint, elderflowers, and yarrow flowers, or combination yarrow flowers and leaf. This I find is really good and really effective at that. Now that I'm mentioning that, I am remembering that we actually forgot to go visit my elderberries outside in the garden. So I'll just mention them real quickly here. I do have 5 elderberry bushes that I've planted outside in my yard. We have not actually harvested any berries from them yet because they are fairly new. Last year I did harvest some of the flowers for the first time. Now, the elderberries and the elderflowers do have related but slightly different medicinal properties. Elderberries are one of the most famous natural medicine components. You know, they're really well known for helping support your body through colds and flus and things like that because they do have some antiviral properties. They're also high in vitamin C, which helps your body to fight off some of that. Elderflowers, I find, are really good for fever. They're also really good for basically helping your body to purge out excess mucus, things like that. And elderflowers, I find, make a really good tasting tea. So I'm growing some of those outside. We didn't take a look at them today. Honestly, they don't look like very much right now anyway because they haven't started leafing out yet. But as the season goes on, we'll definitely look at those more. So back to the yarrow. As I said, combined with elderflower, I really like it for supporting fevers. Additionally, I have a couple apple trees out in my yard that I just planted last year. And what I am trying to do, this will be a separate video, but what I'm trying to do is to create a permaculture guild at the base of each of those apple trees. And yarrow is one of the plants that I've chosen for that permaculture guild. We'll talk more about this in depth in a separate video, but I just wanted to mention it here today. Next, I want to mention chamomile. Chamomile is a great medicinal herb to grow in your garden. It is an annual, so it's something that you'll want to resow every year. Sometimes it will resow itself. I've heard from a lot of people who say that their biggest problem is not growing too much chamomile because it tends to reseed and take over. That is a problem I would love to have because my chamomile so far has not reseeded itself. I have not had an issue. My issue has been growing enough chamomile, not growing too much. So I start this from seed every year. I will say that this has been probably my most successful winter sown plant. So I will not be starting any chamomile inside this year. I planted a couple milk jugs with chamomile out on my deck. Those have all germinated and look beautiful. So I'll be transplanting that out into the garden. Chamomile is another plant that you harvest for the flower. I know chamomile tea is very familiar, something that is really popular even with people who are not necessarily as interested in herbal medicine. Chamomile is really good for relaxation. That's probably what it's most popular and most well known for. So it's really good for that. It's also really good for skincare. It's also really good for supporting your digestion. It's just an all-around soothing, really good tasting herb. So this is a great one to grow. And it has been fairly easy to grow as well. I specifically like this variety, this Dandelion, just because for me it has been more successful than the more classic German chamomile or Roman chamomile. I found the most success with this Dandelion, which I think is, yes, it says it's a Polish variety. Also, the flowers are a little bit larger, which means that each flower will go a little bit farther. It's a little bit easier to harvest, so I really appreciate it for those reasons. Next, I want to mention skullcap. This is actually a perennial, but I don't have any of it established in my garden right now, so I am actually experimenting with winter sowing this as well. At the last time I checked, I had not seen any germination on this plant yet, but I need to check it again. This does like to be cold stratified, which means that it needs to be exposed to a period of cold before it will sprout. It basically needs to be, the plant basically needs to believe that it's gone through winter and it's now spring. So because of that, I sowed some of this out on my deck, I want to say in late January, early February, sometime around there. This is a great plant for supporting your nervous system. It's great for calming. It's great for calming anxious thoughts, great for calming stress. It can be, headaches are such a tricky thing because they have so many different causes. But depending on the root cause of your headache, this can be a great support for helping you through headaches that are caused by like tension and anxiety, things like that. This is just a great all-around nerve support. The final seed that I want to mention that I'm starting for medicinal herbs in my garden this year is holy basil. This is also known as Tulsi. Holy basil or Tulsi is what's considered an adaptogen. Basically, that is just an all-around great plant for supporting your body, for supporting your nervous system, just for overall support. Adaptogens really help your body and your mind to cope with stress. Now, stress comes in many forms. I don't just mean if you have a really stressful job, if you're dealing with some really stressful personal situations, just stress in general. Stress, as I said, comes in many forms, and adaptogens are really great at helping your body to cope with that. So holy basil is really great for that. Holy basil also has a really delicious flavor. As a bonus, if you let it flower, it's also really good for attracting pollinators. So this is just an all-around good plant. I like to harvest and dry a lot of this every year and then use it for tea over the winter and spring. So I will definitely be growing a lot of that this year. So that is my quick rundown of medicinal herbs that I'm planning to grow this year, both some that I already have growing, what I'm planning to start new, and herbs that grow completely on their own without any intervention from me that I just like to harvest. So I hope that this is a helpful introduction. I hope that it encourages you to grow some of these medicinal herbs. And many of these herbs serve multiple purposes in the garden. You know, I've mentioned the calendula, the yarrow, the holy basil. Those are also really great at attracting pollinators to your vegetable garden. Because of that, I like to grow these in my vegetable garden along with all my other plants. I find that they just attract lots of beneficial insects, and they're just all around, just a joy to grow in the garden. So I hope that you will consider adding some of these to your garden this year. If you have any other medicinal herbs that you really love to grow, definitely leave those in the comments, because I would like to hear what other people grow in their gardens, what grows really well for you, and maybe your favorite way to use it as well. So I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.